Your thoughts here on what Hackett had to say in response to Peyton's comments, the idea that he broke the code.
Look, not all criticism is the same. When you're sitting there as a head coach, GM, quarterback, whatever, you're going to get criticized from local media. That's part of the territory. Some of it's interesting and informed. Others is just background noise. But when a Super Bowl winning head coach calls you out publicly on the record, that really stings. I met Nathaniel Hackett over 2 decades ago. He's a wonderful person. Obviously, last year was awful. We've done that autopsy now for several months. So I think what you're seeing is some raw emotion of like, that really stung what Sean Payton said. And I think what he's trying to do now is tamp down the noise and not make the story about him. And the other thing I would add to this, Alan, that I think is important is Sean also called out his current GM, George Payton. When they decide to keep George Payton, that's when you bury everything from the year before. If I was George Payton, I would walk right into Sean Payton, look him between the eyes and say, hey, look, do you want me to call you out the first time you make a mistake on a third down call or not throwing a challenge flag? Is that what we stand for as the 2023 Denver Broncos? We're going to call each other out publicly. So I think what Sean did, call it a code or whatever, he was wrong. He was on the record and he called out too many people. And I credit Nathaniel Hackett for trying to tamp down, this distraction and focus on his team.
Lewis, is there a code that was broken here? What is the issue that you have with all this?
Yeah, look, some things are better left unsaid because of the fact that, your fortunes can change very quickly in the NFL, right? You can go from worst to first to worst in a heartbeat, just like that. And next thing you know, you're the one who people have a bullseye on. So that's kind of why, and the fact that we understand how tough this job is, from basically ownership on down, that within the fraternity, so to speak, you try to keep this kind of, personal back and forth tamped down and kind of behind closed doors. You don't let it get out. Although I can just tell you this, I promise you there are coaches who say this about one another. It just doesn't get out, in the media. It's just not printed. But of course they talk about each other like this. These guys are highly competitive people, and they will call each other out when you're talking to them one-on-one. They just may not put it on TV. But come on now. Look, we understand what happened in Denver last year. We understand how it looked. Nathaniel understands how it looked. It is what it is. Now, he just didn't want to have it put out there like this and doesn't want to have it put out there by one of his peers. But it is what it is. That's why he was fired. That's why he's out of there. That's why he's in New York right now. We all talked about it. So, yeah, look, Sean's one of those people who I respect, who I really like as a coach. And I think, he'd want to be one of those people who I'd love to hire immediately if I ever was in a position to do so. Could he have handled it better? Sure.
All right, Darlington, among the ink-stained wretches who love this kind of drama and these kind of quotes in the offseason, what's your take on this?
Man, I don't know. This is a cutthroat industry. Like, we hear head coaches every year firing their friends as the scapegoats because they're trying to keep their job. Like, I've seen so many things in the coaching industry that exceed the level of code breaking that occurred here. I don't even sense that there really is a code when I ask head coaches. They're like, I asked one head coach last night about this. He goes, I've just never even heard of a coach saying the things that Sean Payton said about a predecessor. But this coach also pointed out, who cares? Like, Sean Payton is doing one thing right here. He has been so tough on Russell Wilson since he got there to make it very clear that he has to change everything about himself if he's going to succeed. All of a sudden, you know what he's doing? He's taking a little bit of that weight off of Russell Wilson and saying that, look, things weren't good here. We're going to be better this year. Maybe he went about it a little bit cold-hearted, but guess what? That's who Sean Payton is. He ain't for the light-hearted. He ain't for the faint. This is just part of the deal, and I guarantee you the Denver Broncos fan base loves it.
No, they should. They need to. Let's roll. Let's put that in the past. But also that Week 5 game, by the way, big red circle around that game for the Jets. And that's what it's all about. All right, Darlington, so we're all waiting to find out where he's going to end up. And here in New York, the expectation was that he wasn't going to leave without a deal done. But he has left without a deal done. So what's the holdup right now?
You know what? I would just say anytime you hear about a player's visit ahead of time, generally there's a reason for that. Generally there's an agent working behind the scenes to make it very clear. When you see a player, I've never seen this, a player literally walking around the field during practice with fans literally chanting Dalvin Cook's name. Again, you don't see that too often, and sometimes there's a reason for it. The question here is this a matter of leverage, or is Dalvin Cook simply just putting himself out there? There are people that are wondering if he's still very interested in the Dolphins, and they just haven't really stepped up enough to get him to sign. So maybe he's putting himself out there saying, do you really want me to stay in the division? We don't know the level of gamesmanship that's going on. I will tell you, there is a place on the Miami Dolphins if and when Dalvin Cook decides to sign a deal with this team. Right now, negotiations haven't reached the point where we should expect it to be imminent, but there is a place on the Miami Dolphins for Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, the concern in New York is are the Jets being used. We've seen this before. Tyreek Hill had the Jets as leverage to get what he wanted when he ended up in Miami. But Mike T, Aaron Rodgers, Dalvin Cook talked openly about Aaron Rodgers and the influence of, boy, I'd love to play with a quarterback like that. But what kind of influence does Rodgers have on this whole decision?
Well, general manager Aaron Rodgers gave back $35 million, so him and his assistant Joe Douglas should be talking about how we're going to get this deal done, because when a player of Aaron Rodgers' stature gives back that type of money, that's not going back to ownership. That's going to improve the roster. So if I'm Aaron Rodgers and we're $1 million or $2 million apart, like, let's go, Joe. Let's get this deal done. The other thing, and Jeff alluded to this, if I was the Jets, I would have had the economics agreed to before we ever got on the plane and say, hey, pending physical, here is the deal. We're either going to sign it on the day of the visit, but if you leave our facility, we're taking this deal off the table because we're not going to be leverage for presumably Miami or New England or anybody else. So I also agree with Jeff. That was a really odd thing, and I'm not really sure what happened because I wouldn't let him come into the building unless we had everything worked out ahead of time. So this goes on, but Dalvin Cook is a really good player that could be meaningfully helpful to either the Jets or the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, they could really change from one team to another, becoming a Super Bowl contender just in that division alone. Louis Riddick, who does he fit better with? Who does he have better impact with, the Jets or the Dolphins?
I think the Dolphins, because of the nature of their offense, the RPO game there, the speed that they have on the perimeter, the way in which teams are going to defend Miami, you know, because of how scared they are of the deep passing game, the light boxes that he'll face there. I mean, I think that would just be something that he would be spectacular in, although I don't necessarily believe that either one of these teams makes a significant jump because they signed Dalvin Cook. Look, when you're talking about the Jets have a super deep running back room. And I think Dalvin understands that too. I think Dalvin has to look at that football team. If I'm him and I'm his age and I'm looking at that football team and I'm going, do I really need to go there? Do they really need me? I'm taking reps away from a guy like rookie Israel Abanikanda from Pitt, who's a home run threat in his own right, and he's a fifth rounder. So, I mean, I think Miami is the better fit both on the field and probably off the field.
He tells the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, I will say that Philadelphia, and you will the Giants and Washington team, they need to be on their game because we're going to be on our game, and we will be the improved over last year. Oh, the gift that keeps on giving. That is the owner, Jerry Jones. Hello, fellas. How are we doing? So let's start with you, Jeff Darlington. Your reaction to Jerry Jones's comments.
I love it. I'm fine with it. He is the most entertaining owner in football and perhaps all of sports. He knows exactly what he's doing when he's doing this. It's all about the drama. It's all about the storylines. Yes, the NFC East is the most overrated division in all of sports. No, the Dallas Cowboys are not in position to be in first place in it. Basically, everything he says, I don't necessarily believe, but I do love it because it means football's around the corner. I love Jerry Jones. I love everything he says. I am totally fine with it.
Louis, you're shaking your head. So am I.
I mean, hey, man. I mean, what else do you expect from Jerry? Look, Jerry gets it. It's more than just about football. When the games are played, there's the lead up to the game being played. There's the engagement with the fan base, getting people excited, raising expectations, raising hope, putting pressure on his football team, quite honestly, to say, hey, look, and in particular, the guy on your screen, Dak Prescott, you can't have a repeat of what you had in San Francisco when our season ended last year. You can't be turning the football over like that. We're supposed to be better. We're supposed to be better on offense. We got you another wide receiver. Tony Pollard, I hope, is going to be healthy for the entire season because he's going to have to carry the load. Zach Martin, we'll get that figured out. Defensively, Micah Parsons, we have a defensive player of the year type player right here, a guy who's going to get ridiculous type of money here, in the future. Yeah, He is raising expectations, but I will say this about the NFC East. I don't believe it's the most overrated division anymore, simply because I think over the past 2 to 3 years, let's just say over the past 2 years in particular, and with the Giants starting with last year, with the changeover in terms of regime, this division is legit. Washington is legit.
No,
They will
that
get
is fair,
going
Lewis.
offensively, and defensively, they're one of the very best. So let's just see how this all pans out.
Yeah, and again, the one thing that Dallas doesn't need is attention. They certainly get it. Any added attention might be considered a bit of a distraction. So, Mike T, from a team perspective, how do you view these types of comments? Jerry's coming from a good place. He just wants to get that. He feels good about his team. But if you're in that front office or if you're in that within the walls there in Dallas, how are you feeling about these comments?
I don't like it. There's a time and a place for an owner to talk. You're going to retain Mike McCarthy. You're going to fire Kellen Moore. Then have at it. But we don't see Jeff Lurie out there talking about how good Jalen Hurts is right now. And Philadelphia arguably may have the better team. Now, I do think Dallas actually got better. Well, I'm just telling you, they don't need any more of this pressure from their owner. They know what the expectations are. They have a star on the side of that helmet. Now, I actually do think they got better, guys, when you think about adding Brandon Cooks, who's 29 years old and can stretch the field, and Stephon Gilmore, who should be a really good corner opposite Trayvon Diggs. So to me, this is a team that got better. And to Lewis's point, this is going to be a really fun division. I think Washington is definitely better, and I think Philadelphia and Dallas will be going back and forth all season long.
Wait a minute. All right, Darlington, you're shaking your head. You're booing Mike T. You're all about the WWE of all this, aren't you?
Yeah, Mike, you're not a GM anymore, man. You're on TV. Let's go. What are you talking about? This isn't boring. What are we doing? Let's have some fun. It's about football. Jeffrey Lurie wouldn't do that. Who cares? Jeffrey Lurie's wonderful guy, boring owner. Jerry Jones magnifying the entire NFL. Come on, Mike T.
You know what, though? You know what I'll say? I'll say this to piggyback that. Look, I think it's quite honestly, I think it's okay for Jerry to ramp up expectations and put some pressure on his football team. We put pressure on the football team. They know what the expectation is this year. Dak in particular knows I can't have double-digit interceptions. We can't keep having these kind of playoff exits. We can't keep not making the playoffs. We can't keep not getting to at least the NFC title game and getting back to the Super Bowl. There's a tremendous history with this football team. A tremendous history that, quite honestly, in the recent past has not been as glorious as it used to be in the early 90s when I was playing against those teams that were just steamrolling everyone. So you know what? I'm quite honestly, look, all joking aside, I'm fine with him doing this. As a matter of fact, they need this kind of thing. Mike McCarthy needs this kind of kick in the rear end because this football team better deliver.
My favorite quote from Jerry Jones is sometimes we play this. It's a lot of times that sound you hear across Texas, that's me up late at night trying to figure out ways that we can win a Super Bowl. Like, he is obsessed with it. He'll keep talking about it. And I'm with Jeff. We love it. But if you're in Dallas, you're like, Jerry, please not now. Are you buying that the Steelers will finish last in the AFC North?
I am, and not necessarily as much as I'm against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and obviously they have a legendary coach in Mike Tomlin. But when you look at the three other quarterbacks, I think Deshaun Watson is going to play markedly better this year. I think Cleveland has a little bit of an underrated roster. And then the other two quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, to me, will be in the thick of the MVP discussion because of having players like Odell Beckham Jr., Zay Flowers, who they took in the first round, and obviously you have Joe Burrow that's led the Bengals to back-to-back AFC Championship games. So to me, I just don't think Pittsburgh will be able to score consistently with those other three teams, despite having some really good weapons in Pickens and Deontay Johnson. I just don't think Kenny Pickett is anywhere close to those other three quarterbacks.
Darlington?
I am cringing at agreeing with Mike T right here because I feel like it just doesn't really happen often, but I agree completely. I would actually push back on Lewis. Like, you made a good point. Somebody's got to finish last. I mean, who's going to finish last if not the Steelers? I'm not saying that they will, but I'm just saying it's very hard to pick any team. What we got? Man, let's go.
Oh, is that right?
Is that right?
It's really hard.
Buttons you got undone there?
Who's gonna finish? Look, like I told you before we came on air, you have to have a chest to do this, and you don't have one. So stop being mad about it. All right. Now listen. Who could you pick to finish? I mean, who could you pick to finish last? We're putting a lot of faith into the Cleveland Browns. A lot. We're assuming a lot of things about the Cleveland Browns. We're assuming a lot of things about Kevin Stefanski that, quite honestly, if I'm Mike Tomlin right now, I'm going, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me, telling me that all of a sudden now we have much more confidence in Kevin Stefanski's track record, and we have a lot more confidence in the ability of Deshaun Watson to all of a sudden just flip the switch and turn the page from last year. Although, look, I do believe he will be much better. I really do. He did look like a guy who wasn't really prepared to play football last year, and 2023 will be a much better indication of what he's going to look like going forward. But to say that Kenny Pickett all of a sudden now is just going to, he's just going to become, average mid Kenny Pickett? We're saying that he's not going to make an improvement in year 2. We're saying George Pickens. Have you seen some of the highlights of George Pickens' catches so far in training camp? Have you seen what this guy is doing? I mean, he is tearing it up. Did you watch the tape of Broderick Jones last year from Georgia, who's going to be their starting left tackle? Najee Harris will be much more of a downfield guy. We don't like Pat Freiermuth? That's what we don't like? We don't like Minka Fitzpatrick? We don't like TJ Watt? We don't like Alex Highsmith? We don't like Mike Tomlin? All of a sudden we're saying, well, how are we going to not pick Pittsburgh? Well, I just gave you a bunch of reasons how you don't pick Pittsburgh.
All right, I'll tell you what, Lewis.
Hey,
how about this, Lewis?
Settle down with the chest popping out, and now your veins popping out of your neck, man. Look, that's exactly the point, is that we should be putting more expectations on the Browns. They've signed Deshaun Watson to the biggest contract ever with the most guaranteed money ever.
Oh, I'm not.
We should expect more from them.
Be quiet with this stuff. We should put more expectations on them. Okay, you know what? I'll go with Mike Tomlin. I'll go with the Steelers. I'll go with Kenny Pickett. Thank you.
All right, we're going to leave it.
Moving on.
We're going to leave it there.
We're done.
No, I don't. And it's not because I just like to disagree with Mike T. I just think that in this day and age with the NFL quarterback landscape, the contracts that exist, it's important to get your guy out there and get your best bang for your buck. I get that you could ruin a guy. I understand that. There is a component in play. But if a guy is even close to ready, it's time to get him out there. Start to win now with that contract. Guys are asking for new deals after the 3rd season at this point. I just think that if a guy is close, err on the side of putting him out there to play. I don't necessarily think you're going to ruin a guy if he truly is the franchise quarterback.
Lewis, haven't we ruined more quarterbacks this way, though, by just forcing them out there because they have to play right away?
Well, and I think we ruin more quarterbacks than we help anyway because of everything that is surrounding them that really does not bode well for their future development. And look, I think every situation is different. I think you have to look at the entire situation in its totality. You have to look at the coaching staff. You have to look at the offensive line in particular. You have to look at the kind of weaponry. You got to look at the defense. And you've got to look at, quite honestly, who's in front of that guy and whether or not he could benefit from sitting and watching him. Because we've seen how that does benefit quarterbacks. There's no doubt that Patrick Mahomes benefited tremendously from sitting behind Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. They had a strong coaching staff. They were building up the roster. They had a good football team, and he benefited tremendously. While at the same time, when you look at Bryce Young's situation down there in Carolina, look, he has a lot of horsepower on that coaching staff in terms of guys who are really, really well schooled as far as bringing along quarterbacks and helping them succeed. And they feel as though he is already further along than maybe what they even expected, that they're able to go ahead and put him right in there in front of Andy Dalton, who, quite honestly, I would have felt very comfortable in having Bryce sit behind Andy for a game or two or the first quarter of the season. So I think you have to take each one of these situations in its own right and look at them individually, and then let the chips fall where they may.
Jeff Darlington, of these young quarterbacks now that are these rookies that are in the league right now that we're talking about, which one of them have you heard the most positive feedback so far?
I don't think that we're there yet, Alan. The one I'm most interested in hearing about is Anthony Richardson. I mean, we're talking about a player who, through the draft process, we talked about his upside being huge, but that he needs the most time to develop. And he might be in a position where he is getting thrust to the wolves the fastest, especially with this looming Jonathan Taylor situation. So to me, the other guys, I think, will be afforded some level of patience. Richardson's the guy who probably needs the most level of patience and is likely not going to get it because of his circumstances.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.